Okay, so TrafficWerks is a traffic system for Leadwerks that's on the Steam Workshop. Um, you'll see that there's a few things it requires, like the vehicles, workshop item by Josh, and I don't know if it requires the car demo prefab, but I would just get it anyway. In this video, I'll show you how to set up a simple track that your vehicles will be able to drive on. So right now, I just have a scene with the standard FPS player. Um, yeah, I just put the prefab in there, and then I have a directional light. And I have just a regular terrain as well. But anyway, so I'll paint basically just um, a crude road, and I will start placing pivot points on it. The way the system works is it works using pivots and connecting those pivots together, and the vehicles will eventually, or the AI will follow those pivots. It doesn't really matter how far they're elevated off the ground, but it might be beneficial to have it so that you can easily select it, so having it underground might not be the best idea. Anyway, I probably shouldn't have picked that road texture because it's the same texture as the pivots themselves, but the reason why I picked it was because it had a strong contrast. So anyway, I just made a bunch of copies of them. Alright, so what I'm doing right now is I'm renaming these pivots. So I made 5 pivots, one for each corner of the road, and then I made one in the middle. So the ones for each corner are named point and then a number. You'll need to do this and try not to have duplicate numbers, because if you do, then one point will override another point, and then you'll just have a mess. Now, the reason why I made a 5th pivot, so for this scene in which you have basically 4 turns, and so I put 4 pivots. You'll probably want to put more pivots just for better turning. Anyway, I have a 4th pivot. Sorry about this. I messed up on the recording. So that's why I was renaming that again. Anyway, so you'll want to make a 5th pivot, and it can be named anything. It doesn't have to be point and then a number. Anyway, put the 5th pivot anywhere on the map you want, but the point pivots, so basically the turns, the ones in the corners, have to be parented under that pivot. Anyway, I probably shouldn't have picked that road texture because it's the same texture as the pivots themselves, but the reason why I picked it was because it had a strong contrast. So anyway, I just made a bunch of copies of them. Alright, so what I'm doing right now is I'm renaming these pivots. So I made 5 pivots, one for each corner of the road, and then I made one in the middle. So the ones for each corner are named point and then a number. You'll need to do this and try not to have duplicate numbers, because if you do, then one point will override another point, and then you'll just have a mess. Now, the reason why I made a 5th pivot, for this scene in which you have basically 4 turns, and so I put 4 pivots. You'll probably want to put more pivots just for better turning. So you'll want to make a 5th pivot, and it can be named anything. It doesn't have to be point and then a number. Anyway, put the 5th pivot anywhere on the map you want, but the point pivots, so basically the turns, the ones in the corners, have to be parented under that pivot. Okay, so now we're going to actually begin connecting these pivots together to basically form a simple road. So when we'll open up a file from the add-on called point.lua. Now there's 4 values here. Don't pay attention to speed limit. That's just an experimental thing. It really doesn't matter what you change it to. Anyway, so there's 3 choices you can pick. Each of these choices requires a number. So basically each choice indicates a new turn. So you can have up to 3. You don't have to have 3. But you'll want to pick another pivot to connect this pivot to. So once you reach this pivot, where are you going to go next? That's basically what those choices indicate. And so if you have 3, it'll randomly pick one of them. For just this tutorial, we'll just make everything point to the pivot below it, and then the last pivot point to the first pivot. So you sort of have like a loop. So what you input in here is the number that follows the point under the name. So for instance, if you have a pivot named pivot 0, and then you want it to point to a pivot called pivot 1, so under choice 1, just put the number of the pivot, don't put the actual pivot name. So you'll put 1 under choice 1. Anyway, I did it for all of them. Okay, now I'm going to explain the car prefab, which is based off of the prefab that Shadmar made, but it has one additional thing called body. And that's more for my game, but I just included it because I didn't really feel like replacing it. Anyway, the body's the mesh that's the body of the car. I did this so that it's easier to swap it out in real time, but you might not have a use for that. Anyway, so the big differences here is that body shouldn't have a mass, shouldn't even have a shape or any physics whatsoever. And instead you'll want the parent, so car entity 1, to have the shape and mass, but the prefab already has all this done. It also has the car AI script attached. So you can ignore the last 3 parameters. The last 2 are specifically for my game, and the second one, the ID, is for respawning, but I don't have respawning enabled here, so you don't have to worry about it. Anyway, so the first one is just the first pivot the car should go to. If it points to something that's like behind it, for instance, it won't turn around, it'll just go to a pivot near it, I guess. It can be kind of unpredictable, so I'm not really too sure, but it'll pick sort of a reasonable pivot at least. Anyway, we'll just pick pivot 0 to start off with. Okay, now we're almost done, but we have to assign one more script. Now I just added this script, it's called carmap.lua. It's also part of the download. The reason why I did this was so that it's easy to basically group a lot of pivots together, and with that carmap script, all the pivots that are the children will be added to a global list of pivots. And so now I'm just running it. Yeah, I have a few things in the left corner that are not really part of it, but anyway. So you'll see that it turns, and it'll actually slow down during its turns, and that's actually a newer thing. I still need to work on it a bit because, as you can tell, it's a little bit, sometimes it doesn't go so smooth. But I guess for now it's okay. Anyway, if you have any questions, just put it, you can comment on the Steam page, this YouTube page, or on the Leadwerks forums, and I should be able to answer it. Or if you have any suggestions, I'd appreciate that. Also, I'd appreciate if there are any like code improvements or whatever.